Before the video starts, let's get some things out of the way. This is part three. Well, not really part three, but like part three of the first two videos I made, like who was the fifth monkey and was Stephen Stills a monkey. This technically counts as a part three since I still didn't make my Chip Douglas video yet, or my Boyce and Hart video, or even my Coco Dolenz video and stuff like that. Also, this video will be long considering I'm going through a whole article about events of like if Stefan did join the Monkees, like everything would be so different, and also people discussing like if he was in the Monkees, how would the things play out and stuff like that. So enjoy the video.
So around 1966, Stephen Stills had been only one of the many who had auditioned for the Monkees. But he had been rejected due to his thinning hair and crooked teeth. But even though he was rejected, he was the one who suggested Peter Tork come down and audition, leading to Tork getting the job and going down his OTL path. But what if he had instead been accepted? What if Stephen Stills joined the Monkees in 1966? I feel he would have bonded with Nesmith much more than Peter did.
Since Stephen Stills is in the Monkees, Neil Young and Bruce Palmer don't go to Los Angeles looking to start a band with him, and Buffalo Springfield is never formed, nor CSNY. Know for what it's worth or Woodstock, someone else will have to be the soundtrack of the anti-war movement. Rick James doesn't follow Neil Young to LA, so he isn't at Stephen Stills' house the night Jim Morrison is tripping balls and slashes his wrists to admire the blood flow. Nobody else is awake to render first aid, R.I.P. Jim Morrison. Maybe Buffalo Springfield does form in 1967, in actual Buffalo, with Neil Young, Bruce Palmer, and Rick James.
I'm so glad you posed this question, Red Beetle. I'm not so sure that Nesmith would be in the Monkees if Stills is. That would be two Texans in the group, and if I remember correctly, Don Kirshner did not care for Nesmith's voice. The Monkees were fairly geographically balanced, so I think the fourth member of this ATL Monkees would be from the Northeast or Chicago. Not sure who that could be.
Neil Diamond wrote much of the Monkees' oeuvre. Would that have worked with Stills? Also, the TV franchise was an important part of the Monkees. How would Stills have fit that?
Without Tork or Nesmith, Neil Diamond might have written more of the songs. Would Diamond have worked in the group? The wool hat hiding Stills' receding hairline would have made more sense than it did on Nesmith. I foresee Don Kirshner making Stills the drummer and Dolenz a guitar player, probably bass. IRL Mickey was actually a guitar player and learned to play drums for the show. I would also imagine that Mickey could take on the dummy role that Tork did. Diamond is a little old, but he could also take a year or two off his birth date just as Tork did. This configuration would have been interesting. I wonder how far the rebellion against Kirshner would have gone.
It's certainly not a question many people, even music historians, ponder, especially in 2010. Well, that's where this article is from. We're in 2023 now, but I still wonder this anyway. What if Stephen Stills had successfully auditioned for the Monkees? How would that have affected the music of the 60s and 70s? One might be surprised at how many fingers Stills had in the stew. Alright, this article is getting weird already. I originally want to skip past this part of the article that talks about if Stephen had joined the Monkees, but I guess it's important that you guys know about this, because I know some people out there don't know what the Monkees, like who they were and stuff like that, and don't even know their show, so I'm just gonna read this through, because there's actually something interesting in here that I feel you guys should know about, so let's just, keep reading. So, before diving into the life and times of Stephen Stills, a little background on the Monkees, both the band and the TV series, is needed. Most people born before the 90s know that the Monkees were a completely prefabricated Hollywood construct, much more than they were a musical act. Those of you from the 90s onward who are aware of that fact, kudos to you. The concept was created by director, writer, and producer Bob Rafelson, the bane of my existence. Most famous for writing and directing 5 easy pieces starring Jack Nicholson and Bert Schneider, which is funny because Jack Nicholson was the one who decided, hey, let's make Head, and Bert Schneider also helped with the production of the Monkees. Originally, the producers wanted to base the show around an already existing band, in particular, the Loving Spoonful. If you guys follow me on Instagram, you would know that I've drawn them already, so I actually, not gonna lie, I wouldn't mind a show about them. But anyways, however, the band's record label refused to grant Screen Gems Productions the right to use any music. It was then that the decision was made to make, quotes on that, a band. The Monkees were comprised of three Americans, Mickey Dolenz, Michael Nesmith, and Peter Tork, and one Englishman, Davy Jones, all of whom were more actors than musicians. Tork came to the producers' attention via Stephen Stills, Tork's friend and former roommate. You see, Stephen Stills had auditioned for the Monkees in 1966, but failed to get cast mostly due to his appearance. While he was only 21, he had thinning hair and bad teeth and simply looked too old. He also had some issues with Screen Gems. Part of the contract with the show required all music publishing's right to go to Screen Gems, something Stills was smartly unwilling to give up. Thus, Peter Tork was suggested by Stephen Stills and added to the band's roster. The Monkees went on to become a rather successful pop act, including becoming the very first music act to win an Emmy, of which the band and show earned 2, as well as being the only act to have its first 4 albums go to #1 on the Billboard charts, something even the Beatles failed to accomplish. Their peak years were from 1966 to 1968, eventually disbanding in 1971, and their highlight reel includes giving Jimi Hendrix Experience its first U.S. concert appearances as the Monkees' opening act in the summer of 1967, a few weeks after Monterey Pop. Yes, that Jimi Hendrix. They may or may not have achieved these feats with Stephen Stills, but I don't think that is the important issue. I think we need to ask, if Stephen Stills had joined the Monkees, what wouldn't have happened?
The Monkees, brought to you by Kellogg's. K-E-double-L-O double good. Kellogg's best to you.
We're gonna need a little more background information before we hop into the what if Stephen Stills joined the Monkees, what would happen train. Stephen Stills was born in Texas, just like Mike Nesmith, and lived throughout the southern U.S. and Central America during his childhood. Upon dropping out of the University of Florida, I don't blame you, Stephen, that's Florida for you, he moved to New York City to pursue a life in music. Playing in various folk or vocal harmony groups, Stills hopped around New York City coffee house scene, eventually getting into a group called the AU Go-Go Singers. It was in this collective that Stills met future Buffalo Springfield co-member Richie Furay. After the breakup of the AU Go-Go Singers in 1965, some of the members continued on as the company and went on a short 6-week tour of Canada. While on tour, Stephen Stills met a young guitarist and another future member of Buffalo Springfield, Neil Young. Now, if that name sounds familiar, that's because that's the same Neil Young that is in Stephen Stills' band, Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young, although before Neil Young joined the band, it was Crosby, Stills, and Nash. So, after the dissolution of the company, Stephen Stills migrated to LA, where he found himself immersed in the burgeoning folk rock scene. During this time, Stephen Stills did session work and even auditioned for the Monkees. Here is where the fork in the road rests. All of that happened before the Monkees audition would not change, but everything after could be forever changed and lost. So, here is what wouldn't have happened had Stephen Stills joined the world of prefab bubblegum pop television. So, let's get one thing out of the way. If Stephen Stills joined the Monkees, Buffalo Springfield never would have happened. That's the first domino we knocked down. So, Richie Furay would have not been coaxed out of Massachusetts to come to LA and join Stephen Stills in The Herd, which was the original name of Buffalo Springfield. Neil Young would have continued driving down Sunset Boulevard in his retrofitted hearse, not getting pulled over by Stills and Furay, and not joining Buffalo Springfield. Buffalo Springfield is very important because they contributed to folk rock and later country rock, and it's immeasurable, and along with the Byrds, which also David Crosby was in that band as well, helped lay a foundation for the California rock sound. Buffalo Springfield's biggest hit, For What It's Worth, which was written by Stephen Stills, would have never have been composed. This song was one of the most important representative tracks of the era, recognizable from the first guitar note through the drum progression and, of course, the unforgettable chorus. The song was inspired by the riots along Sunset Strip during 1966 to 1967, using his own experiences of political rioting in Costa Rica during his youth and applying it to the current situation. Stephen Stills managed to create a song that carried its message without beating it over the listener's head. Not quite a protest song, this track would help forge the music paths over the next few years. However, because Stephen Stills was busy in pre-production with the Monkees, Buffalo Springfield never happened, never matriculated. Richie Fry, state of Massachusetts, never formed Buffalo Springfield or Poco, two bands tremendously influential in the development of the California sound, and in particular, the Laurel Canyon community. Neil Young managed to get a solo recording contract and piddled around during the next decade, eventually living out his days in a homeless shelter wearing nothing but a flannel. To say that the members of the Byrds and fellow Birdman David Crosby had issues by the time they dismissed them from the band would be an understatement. So to say that Stephen Stills helped speed up with that decision may or may not be entirely accurate. During 1967, the Byrds were huge. Crosby and McGuinn had come to their own in terms of signature songwriting and sounds. Drugs, alcohol, and ego combined to create a very tense working environment. During the Byrds' Friday night performance at Monterey Pop, Crosby would rant on with his political discourse in between songs, much to the band's dislike. The following night, Stills managed to add fuel to the fire when he asked Crosby to fill in for missing Neil Young during Buffalo Springfield's set. Crosby was dismissed from the Byrds the following fall. Now, Crosby would have been fired soon enough. However, it wouldn't have been Stephen Stills' fault because in June of 1967, he was still in rehearsal for, hypothetically speaking, he was still in rehearsal for the Monkees tour to begin in July with Jimi Hendrix as an opener and not at Monterey Pop poking the bear. Now, one thing that should be mentioned, though, before we keep going, is that Stephen Stills and Jimi Hendrix were actually still fans regardless of the Monkees being involved at all. So, however, if Stephen Stills had joined the Monkees, Jimi may have never offered the position of bass player in the Experience to him. That's actually a thing you guys probably don't even know, that Jimi Hendrix offered it to Stephen Stills, but he didn't technically never made the offer directly to Stephen Stills, but to his manager. But afraid that Stephen Stills would have taken the gig and left Buffalo Springfield, he never passed on the message. So Hendrix would go on to offer the spot to Noel Redding. Despite not working together in the Experience, the two musicians remained friends, and Hendrix played guitar on the song Old Times Good Times from Stephen Stills' self-titled solo debut in 1970. Of course, that wouldn't have happened had Stills been with the Monkees, but that would be in 1970, and we're getting a bit ahead of the made-up timeline. After the dissolution of Buffalo Springfield in 1968 and Crosby's dismissal from the Byrds in the fall of 1967, Stills and Crosby found themselves at Joni Mitchell's house in Laurel Canyon through an invitation by my favorite woman, Mama Cass Elliot. I love that woman. I love her so much. While there, the two met British musician Graham Nash, formerly of the Hollies. From this meeting, the three went on to form the coolest supergroup ever. Crosby, Stills, and Nash, and sometimes Neil Young was in there, but you know. The intricate vocal harmonies, soaring guitars, and beautiful songwriting would help propel Crosby, Stills, and Nash, and as I said before, occasionally Neil Young, towards becoming one of the biggest bands in the world, crossing folk, rock, pop, and even dabbling in other influences. Joni Mitchell wrote the song Woodstock for the festival, which they sang, and Sweet Judy Blue Eyes and about a half dozen other songs Stills wrote in relation to folk singer Judy Collins would not exist, actually, if he was in the Monkees. In fact, his relationship with Collins would probably never have even occurred. No offense, but I doubt a serious folk singer would want to mingle with a monkey. I mean, back then, at least, I guess. Especially if you knew, in an alternate timeline, her movie boyfriend would wrote, For What It's Worth. Now, this is what the article's saying, though, but in my opinion, I feel like she would date him still, but, only because he's a monkey. Because they were getting really popular, so, I would assume that, anyone would want to date Stephen Stills, but also the fact that because of his appearance, I would say not really, which, I don't know what she saw in him then before, if he wasn't a monkey, which he isn't a monkey, but, him not being a monkey, no offense to Stephen Stills, of course, I think he's an attractive-looking guy, I don't see anything wrong with him. I think he looks great, I'm not saying anything bad. So, Stephen Stills did not attend such a gathering of musicians at the behest of Mama Cass, because he never officially met her. 1968 was the final season of the Monkees, and as such, Stills would have been in pre-production during the fall of 1967. He was also probably collecting his Emmy instead of the multiple Grammys he might have won had his thinning hair and bad teeth worked against him. So, in effect, if Stephen Stills had joined the Monkees in 1966, there would have been no Buffalo Springfield, no For What It's Worth, no Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, no Judy Collins Pining, no new direction in harmonizing and songwriting, no new development of country rock in the way we know today, no soft rock stars like James Taylor or Carly Simon, no alternative country, no Flying Burrito Brothers, no Manas. Extending it to today, there would be no Anodyne, no Wilco, Ryan Adams who? But there would have been one not so funny, heavyset, slightly balding guy on TV that might have made you laugh. So here is where another fork can be inserted. Peter Tork, Stephen Stills' replacement, left the Monkees in 1969, citing exhaustion and stress. Now, Stephen Stills probably had a sturdier constitution and probably would have stuck it out until the next year when Michael Nesmith left in 1970. After Mike Nesmith's departure, leaving only Dolenz and Jones in the band, Stills might have also jumped ship. When Mickey and Davey lost the rights to use the name The Monkees on any future recordings, Stephen Stills would have definitely split the scene. So, effectively, we can say that by 1970, Stephen Stills would have been a solo artist again, just in time for the release of his 1970 self-titled debut album. Stephen Stills' self-titled debut album came out in 1970 and featured both Jimi Hendrix and Eric Clapton on guitar, one track each, and backing vocals from Force of Habit, Crosby, Nash, and Mama Cass. It is a folk rock masterpiece on par with Crosby, Stills, Nash's and Deja Vu. That's like two albums, by the way, two separate albums. This album was recorded amidst the breakup of the supergroup, and Stills injects personal feelings throughout, allowing it to feel akin to the previous albums, but still render a different outcome upon listening. However, none of this would have happened during the time that Stills had cultivated these friendships and working relationships. He would have been with the Monkees. He would have never have been in the same circles as Eric Clapton, Jimi Hendrix, or Mama Cass, and as such, his solo album would have sounded remarkably different. It is known that Mike Nesmith and Frank Zappa were good friends, so much so that the latter appeared in a cameo bit introducing an episode of the series, and also Frank Zappa appeared in Head.
Pretty white.
Well, so am I. What can I tell you?
You've been working on your dancing, though.
Oh, yeah. Well, I've been rehearsing it. Glad you noticed that.
Yeah, it doesn't leave much time for your music. You should spend more time on it because the youth of America depends on you to show the way.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Monkees is the craziest people.
Imagine Stephen Stills having Zappa playing with him and Stills working with the mothers instead of Laurel Canyon Community. Zappa protege Captain Beefheart may have also been different had Stills been a collaborator with the Magic Band. If Stills' masterpiece Manassas had been made without the collaborative help of former Bird and Flying Burrito Brothers Chris Hillman, it might have been one awesome experimental masterpiece unrivaled by anything Zappa, Stills, or Beefheart did on their own, much less any of the folk rock, country rock outfits. But it certainly would have not been instrumental in further development of what would become to be called country rock, or it could have been one utterly grotesque, bloated disaster, much like Beefheart's Unconditionally Guaranteed. Alright, so that's the end of the video. I realize this video is probably very long, but, we finally concluded the Stephen Stills part of, my little series I'm doing. So I guess part 3, well, not part 3, part 4. Yes, part 4 will be either Chip Douglas or Boyce and Hart, because for Coco Dolenz, I might need to do a bit more research, because she's not technically a monkey, but like she's contributed to the Monkees. So that'll take me a while. But the next video might be the iceberg video I've been planning. It's if it's not that, it might be the collab I'm doing where me and my friend fix the new Monkees, because let's be honest, the new Monkees, they need a lot of work done. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you all later.
She knows her mind all right, your Auntie Griselda. She says she knows my kind, she might maybe so. Oh yeah, she's raised you right, your Auntie Griselda. You only know the things she wants you to know. I know she's having a fit, she doesn't like me a bit. No bird of grace ever lit on Auntie Griselda. Can't begrudge her style, your Auntie Griselda. She couldn't budge a smile and do it for free. So righteous making fudge, your Auntie Griselda. So proper judging others over her tea.